that they need to achieve favorable outcomes. We must improve our ability to detect and track potential threats anywhere in the world.
और इसके लिए आवश्यक है कि हम संभावित चुनौतियों को ठीक से समझें, उनकी पहचान करें और ट्रैक करें.
4 strategic principles in our homeland defense design. All domain awareness, that's from undersea to on orbit and everything in between, including cyber. Information dominance, that's the use of advanced capabilities such as machine learning and artificial intelligence to analyze and process data much sooner and deliver that data, what I call decision superiority.
Information warfare से लेकर artificial intelligence और इन तमाम क्षेत्रों से आती हुई चुनौतियों के लिए हमको खुद को
all domain and global. These principles are vital elements to integrated
ये चुनौतियां हमारे सामने लगातार बनी हुई हैं.
To deter in competition, de-escalate in crisis, and if necessary, defeat in conflict. I continue to work closely with my fellow commanders, including Admiral Richard and General Dickinson, the services, the department.
तो ये आपने देखा, अपनी तैयारियों के विषय में जानकारी दी जा रही है. यूनिफाइड कमांड
Belarus.
But most Ukrainians don't believe the Kremlin is listening, as women and children continue to flee to countries like Poland, perhaps dreaming of a better life, and if they can ever get back home.
Well, we have coverage from on the ground in Ukraine. I'm joined now by our correspondent, Funny Pachar. Good evening to you, Funny. You know, we have been hearing from the Russians today threats of a big offensive on Kyiv that was supposed to happen at any moment today. We haven't had any reports of anything like that taking place. Do we know why?
There are various theories circling around, and I really don't want to get into speculations, but certainly there were pictures. that we see those checkpoints, but also various barricades. When you see them, of course, this is the time when you put your phone down and you don't ask any questions, but hear what they have to say, what are their questions, so they let you through. It is a tense situation, but once again, this country is not in its usual state as it was just a week ago. Everyone here is on alert and is trying to fight or fend off this Russian aggression that they're experiencing on so many levels, be it humanitarian, military level, or on a political level right now.
DW's Fanny Fachar giving us excellent insight on the ground there in Western Ukraine. Fanny, thank you, and please, whatever you do, stay safe. U.S. and European intelligence say that Russia's military did not expect the Ukrainian military to put up such a strong resistance. Now, military analysts say they are worried that the setback, plus the public embarrassment attached to it, may compel Russian President Vladimir Putin to opt for even deadlier measures. DW's William Glucroft picks up that part of the story now.
Yeah, let's remember that Putin deployed nearly 200,000 troops to Ukraine's borders in the last few months, which means many of them have not actually been committed to combat yet. But we might be seeing signs of that starting to change after light, fast attacks around the country appear not to be going quite in Russia's favor. Now, you might have heard, and we've talked about already, this massive Russian convoy put together from forces based in Belarus. That's Ukraine's northern border. Now, satellite imagery shows it is heading towards the capital, Kyiv, and it's grown in the last couple of days, apparently stretching 65 kilometers, made up of hundreds of vehicles. That's tanks, artillery, troop transports, these kinds of heavy armored, heavy mechanized vehicles. Now, we don't know exactly how this kind of equipment is going to be used, when it's going to reach Kyiv. Moving this amount of armor at once takes a long time. There's fuel and supplies that need to keep up. And Russia, we've been hearing, appears to be struggling with those kinds of supply lines. But if we look at the battle lines of where things stand in Kyiv right now, they haven't budged much since Russian forces first started assaulting the capital. We see Russian forces having pretty much control of the northern parts of the city. There have, of course, been attacks from the air, but Ukrainian troops have so far beaten back or held the line just north of the city. The city government says it's still in control there, but the Russians, as you can see, they're at the gates of the city. It's unclear for how long Ukrainian defenses can hold out. They are heavily outmatched. And this seems to be the case all around the country, where Russian ground troops, they've really not broken out much from where their initial invasion point started, in the north, in the east, and in the south. And this has taken Russian military planners a bit by surprise. That might sound like good news for Ukraine, but do not be fooled. The Ukrainian resistance has been impressive, but it has come at a very steep cost. And for all the violence we've seen, Russia still has a lot more firepower on the ground and from the air it can deploy, and it looks like it's gearing up to do just that.
Well, I'm joined now by Yevgenia Kravchuk. She is a member of the Ukrainian parliament for the Servant of the People Party. Ms. Kravchuk, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I know that these hours tonight, particularly, there's a lot at stake for you and your country. I understand that talks between Russia and Ukraine are expected to take place tomorrow for the second time since the invasion began. Do you want these talks to take place?
Good evening. Thank you for covering the war in Ukraine, because the world needs to know what the real situation is in the center of Europe in the 21st century. We do not have the confirmation for tomorrow's talks, but we know that the second round of negotiations will be held. And of course, as it's in every negotiation process, the positions of the sides play a crucial role. That's why Russians are trying to threaten Ukrainian government and president by bombing and shelling civilians. Today we had a huge war crime committed by Putin's regime in Kharkiv. I have to remind where Kharkiv is. Kharkiv is 40 kilometers from Russian border in eastern Ukraine. It's a mostly Russian-speaking city. But Russians in these 6 days could not conquer nor Kharkiv nor Kyiv. But Kharkiv was heavily bombed, the center of the city this morning. We lost at least 8 civilians in this bombing. Just imagine, center of the city, central square where all the government buildings are, and it was bombed by 2 flying rockets, as so-called. Also, we have confirmation that Russian used vacuum bombs and cassette bombs. They are forbidden to use, especially for civilians, and they were used in Sumy region, in Ochtyrka, and in other places. So we see this as Russia trying to threaten and to to make the position of Ukrainian side getting to get worse.
Ms. Kravchuk,
but we're sure that these.
If I could just ask you, you're listing, of course, all of these offenses by the Russian military. We understand that Russian airstrikes are intensifying. The capital, Kyiv, is under threat tonight. Without Russia first stopping its airstrikes, what is there to discuss or negotiate between your country and Russia?
Well, that's the deal. We do not feel that Russia is making efforts for negotiation. That's why we ask the world, we ask countries of NATO to endorse so-called no-fly zone. No-fly zone was endorsed in, for example, Libya in 2011. And I understand that some politicians say we do not want to go into it, but the whole world is already into it. You can't just, close your eyes and think that Ukrainians will fight back Putin by themselves. Of course, no one could imagine that Ukraine will be fighting, so furiously. All the intelligence service in Germany, as well as I know, and in United States, said that Russian troops will be in Kyiv mostly in 2 days. We have 6 days, and it never happened. And the casualties of Russia are very high.
Let me ask you, Ms. Kravchuk, about this proposed no-fly zone over Ukraine. The response has been very muted from the West, but you do understand that the concern is NATO air jets, U.S. jets, would have to police a no-fly zone that could put them in direct physical contact and conflict with Russian forces. That would up the stakes of this war even further. Is that something that you're calling for?
It's already further than you think, and countries of NATO will eventually come in, but I do not want it to be too late and not to see thousands of civilians dead. Today, maybe 2 hours ago, one of the streets of Kyiv was bombed because nearby was a TV station.
Yeah.
5 people died of one bomb. They burned completely. It was a family because they were, working together. Can you imagine this in 2022 in the world that seeks democracy, seeks, normal life? The whole world is been threatening by one person. I think that the world has to respond unless we do not have the future on this planet.
Yevgenia Kravchuk, a member of the Ukrainian parliament for the Servant of the People Party. Ms. Kravchuk, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us tonight. We know that doing so, is a risk to your personal safety as well as the safety of countless others. We appreciate you, despite that, helping us get the story out to the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. The United Nations says that more than 660,000 people have now fled Ukraine since the invasion began, the majority of them crossing over into Poland. Now, only occasionally do you see some Ukrainians who are traveling in the other direction. I'm talking about men who were living in safety, returning to defend their homeland. DW's Max Zander reports tonight.
Przemyśl train station is no place to stay. Those who can keep on going, inland and away from the border. But not these men. They are heading in the other direction. I am not risking anything. How could I live with myself and stay here? Sergei has a wife and 2 daughters in Ukraine. Leaving his job in Poland and returning home to Ukraine to fight was not a hard choice for him. I was just in shock. My family was home, my wife called me, and I could hear the bombings over the phone. He has a bulletproof vest and 2 helmets organized by his friends. I ask him if he thinks they are going to keep him safe. I am going to put it on and I'm going to shoot Russians until I find out. Tough talk to cope with this situation. Sergei is scared, he tells us. Who wouldn't be? On the platform
upon Ukrainians. Mr. President, my delegation would like to thank you for organizing this emergency special session of the General Assembly devoted to considering the draft resolution on the situation in Ukraine. My country will vote in favor of the draft resolution submitted to us to indicate its commitment to respect for the integrity and territorial sovereignty and independence of states, as well as to the peaceful settlement of disputes as provided for in the United Nations Charter. Côte d'Ivoire will therefore vote for peace and will defend it everywhere against war and against the law of right makes right. We must always keep in mind the responsibility that is incumbent upon us to leave future generations with more than we received from previous generations. Mr. President, my country notes with regret that the many efforts made by the international community, including the United Nations, have not helped spare the world from another high-intensity conflict. The crisis in Ukraine has harmful consequences not only for this country, but also for the entire region, and could constitute a threat to international peace and security. My delegation is sincerely concerned by the deplorable slide into conflict in Ukraine, which moves us further away from the principles and purposes that we freely adhered to as member states of the United Nations. While reiterating its commitment to the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, Côte d'Ivoire would like to invite all parties to observe an immediate ceasefire in order to save lives and to give dialogue a chance. This needs to be a frank and sincere dialogue. Silencing the weapons is essential in order to return to diplomacy with a view to bringing an end to this unacceptable war. Mr. President, my delegation is also highly concerned by the high figures communicated by the UN High Commission for Refugees on displaced persons fleeing the fighting in Ukraine. We thus call on the parties to the conflict to respect humanitarian law and to facilitate access to assistance for the populations that need it. We also make a sincere appeal to the international community, including humanitarian actors, for them to mobilize the resources needed to provide assistance to those populations in distress in Ukraine and also in the countries that are hosting many refugees. Mr. President, my country has learned that persons of African origin who are fleeing the terror that has broken out over Ukraine are facing racist-tinged treatment and bullying. If these reports are proven accurate, we would have reason to raise legitimate questions over this, at the very least, a discriminatory and inhumane attitude. I take this opportunity to call upon the nationals of these friendly countries that are engaging in this behavior to show greater restraint, tolerance, and humanity in these challenging moments for the entire international community. To conclude, Côte d'Ivoire would like to reiterate its call for an immediate ceasefire so that dialogue can begin without delay. Dialogue, which is the #1 tool for the peaceful settlement of any dispute as called for in the United Nations Charter. The first president of independent Côte d'Ivoire, the late Félix Houphouët-Boigny, said quite rightly on the subject of dialogue, and I quote, "In the pursuit of peace, of true peace, of just and lasting peace, we must not hesitate for an instant to tenaciously pursue dialogue. Dialogue is most certainly the weapon of the strong and not that of the weak." End quote. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Côte d'Ivoire. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Republic of Moldova.
Mr. President, the Republic of Moldova aligns itself with the statement of the European Union and wishes to add the following remarks in its national capacity. Excellencies, the Republic of Moldova was among the 81 co-sponsors of the draft resolution that could not be passed by the Security Council. As the debate was transferred to the General Assembly, where we all have equal rights to vote, we decided to co-sponsor again the new draft resolution. By doing this, Moldova wants to add its contribution to the collective efforts aimed at stopping the war and helping our organization to fulfill its mission as the utmost defender of international law, peace, and security. Distinguished delegates, the Republic of Moldova condemns in the strongest possible terms the act of war launched by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. This attack constitutes a blatant breach of international law and a serious violation of the fundamental documents and principles on which this organization and the international order are based. We are horrified by the unprovoked use of force against Ukraine, our friendly and neighboring country. The terrible death toll of the 5 days of military actions is rising with every hour. Numerous civilian deaths, hundreds of thousands of displaced persons and refugees, destroyed infrastructure. We must act immediately to stop this ordeal against the Ukrainian people that threatens regional and international peace and security. Therefore, while being a neutral country, we urge the Russian Federation to immediately stop the use of military force, to completely withdraw all its military forces from the territory of Ukraine, and to return to dialogue and diplomacy as the only means for ensuring peace and stability on our continent. Mr. President, the 6th day of war have triggered a major humanitarian crisis in the region. Ukraine and its people are the most hardly hit. But the crisis also affected particularly hard the neighboring countries, including Moldova, that are coping now with the challenge of effectively handling the large refugee flow coming from Ukraine. Since the start of hostilities, about 95,000 refugees fleeing from Ukraine have entered Moldova. The absolute majority of them are women, children, and the elderly. To put this figure into perspective, given the difference in the size of the population, such a flow would equal to about 2 million refugees entering a country with a population size of Germany in just 5 days. More than half of those who entered Moldova, being afraid for their lives and seeking shelter, decided to remain in my country. We are talking about 60,000 persons which are now being taken care of and accommodated by the Moldovan authorities and welcomed to their homes by ordinary Moldovans. We do our best to cope with this situation, but we also need the support of our partners. In this regard, the Republic of Moldova fully supports the humanitarian appeal launched by the United Nations Secretary General to scale up humanitarian assistance in and around Ukraine. In the coming days, the Republic of Moldova will be visited by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Mr. Filippo Grandi, whom we welcome and are looking forward to discussing the avenues for
यूक्रेन की बूचा में भी खार्किव जैसी तबाही नजर आ रही है। गोलीबारी में कई इमारतें तबाह हो गई हैं देर रात हुए हमले के बाद।
Humanitarian crisis. We'll continue keeping our borders open for those who seek refuge in Moldova. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to express our full solidarity with Ukraine, its people, and its democratically elected authorities. The Republic of Moldova reiterates its strong and unwavering support for the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Moldova. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nepal.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, at the outset, I'd like to thank you, Mr. President, for convening this emergency special session of the General Assembly. Truly a global parliament with 193 member states to deliver on its urgent responsibility to maintain international peace and security in general and to restore peace in Ukraine in particular. Nepal is deeply concerned with the deaths and human sufferings in Ukraine and calls for an urgent cessation of hostilities and violence. We call on all parties concerned to exercise maximum restraints to de-escalate the tension immediately. We are also deeply concerned about the safety and security of Nepali nationals currently in Ukraine and request all concerned for the facilitation of their safe passes from there. We call on the parties concerned to honor the obligation under international humanitarian law for the protection of the civilians and civilian objects. Violence breeds more violence, and it never incubates peace. Make no mistake, there is no alternative to the path of peace. Diplomacy and dialogues are the only pathways to restoring and building lasting peace. My delegation welcomes starting of direct talks between the parties concerned. We urge both sides to resume and continue to engage in dialogue with utmost sincerity and commitment to peace and find a durable political solution at the earliest. Nepal views that the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity as enshrined in the UN Charter are sacrosanct and must be fully respected by all member states, irrespective of their economic prowess or military might. We oppose any threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any sovereign country under any pretext or circumstances. Mr. President, let me reiterate Nepal's unwavering faith in the peaceful resolution of international disputes through diplomacy and dialogue. Returning to the path of peace is never late, and it is high time to choose to return. I urge all concerned parties to give peace a chance. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nepal. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Grenada.
Mr. President, at the outset, Grenada aligns itself with the statements of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, issued on the 24th of February, and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, of the 26th of February. Mr. President, Grenada expressly condemns the Russian Federation's assault on the people of Ukraine. Assault on the principles of respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, and assault on the provisions of international peace and stability as enshrined in the Charter of this very United Nations. Universal respect and adherence to these norms and principles of international law are fundamental to the maintenance of the international system and global peace and security. The rule of law is not merely a priority, but is also existential for many small states who are without a military like Grenada, serving as the sole shield to outside interference and/or attack. We call for an immediate end to the hostilities. The long history of diplomatic engagement among countries provides adequate tools for the settlement of disputes without having to resort to violence, which hurts the very people who give leaders legitimacy in office. We therefore reassert CARICOM's call on all parties involved to urgently embark on intensified diplomatic dialogue to immediately de-escalate hostilities and work towards a sustainable peace. Grenada supports and commends the efforts of the United Nations Secretary General to bring a speedy resolution to the conflict. Mr. President, we commend also the neighboring countries who are meeting the moment and are providing much needed refuge to the victims of these hostilities. We further call for strict adherence to international humanitarian law, including the unfettered passage for all those fleeing conflicts. We are concerned by the reports of the disparate treatment of African nationals on the border who are encountering impediments as they desperately seek safety. We call on all states to uphold and adhere to its international obligations. Mr. President, we are 1 minute to midnight. We must pull back from the brink. We urge all parties to continue dialogue, return to diplomacy, peace, and to the bedrock principles upon which this august body was founded. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Grenada. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Mr. President, Excellencies, dear colleagues, Bosnia-Herzegovina allied itself with European Union statement. I will make following remarks in my national capacity. As we speak, the world is facing one of its most acute security crises since World War II. At this very moment, the attack on Ukraine is taking new civilians victims. The fighting is ongoing. The UN Charter is being ignored or violated, and 500,000 civilians have already been internally displaced or forced to flee across international border into neighboring European countries. The Ukrainian government estimates as many as 5 million refugees will be displaced in the worst-case scenario. The innocent people always pay the highest price. The most vulnerable suffer the most. As deaths are rising, we are seeing images of fear and terror in every corner of Europe. What can be the message of the ambassador of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the country that suffered aggression, the brutal occupation for almost 4 years, facing the arms trade embargo, where genocide was committed 3 decades ago, and almost half of the population was brutally killed, displaced, or expelled. Developing situation in Ukraine, unfortunately, resonates awfully close to home. That is why we should not wait anymore. As a result of the conflict, millions of Ukrainians are in need of humanitarian assistance. We call on both sides to respect international humanitarian law and guarantee unhindered and sustained access for humanitarian actors, including UNHCR and other UN agencies, as well as national and international NGOs who all help people in need. The people of Bosnia-Herzegovina recognize the brave women and men of Ukraine fighting for their sovereignty and freedom. Bosnia-Herzegovina remains committed to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, as we do for every member states of the United Nations. That is the foundation of our UN Charter that we did not expect to be challenged in this brutal way, but one of the founding members and creators of this very organization. And permanent members of the Security Council have a particular responsibility in upholding the Charter. Russia's aggression against Ukraine has severe global implications. Non-compliance with the fundamental principles of international law, the UN Charter and basic principles of international relations directed towards another state is a very serious concern. These rules apply to all. We call on all international organizations, especially the International Court and tribunals, to closely monitor the developments on the ground and to assess any violation of international law, including international humanitarian law. The Security Council, which according to the UN Charter has the obligation and general powers to maintain the international peace and security, has unfortunately, in this case, failed so far. Negotiating peace must continue to be objective over any military solution to the crisis. We reiterate the Secretary General call for immediate cessation of hostilities and start of bilateral negotiation for a peaceful resolution of the conflict in line with the UN Charter. We have been given a little hope as the first attempt for bilateral negotiation between the representatives of Ukraine and the Russian Federation started yesterday. I'm hopeful that all sides will be able to put an additional effort to stop the bloodshed and return to negotiating table as soon as possible. Mr. President, we are facing an unprecedented international situation where the use of nuclear weapons is becoming an option. We are, as a global community, ready to put the generation of children before this challenge. Have we, as the United Nations, sourced all available means in accordance with the UN Charter, including Chapter 7, that enables the Security Council to take coercive action with respect to the threat of the peace, breaches of the peace, and acts of the aggression. It's my hope that the United Nations will not wait long and let many more civilians and innocent people suffer and be killed, displaced, or expelled before taking appropriate action to end this brutal bloodshed, as it was the case in my own country 30 years ago. At the end of this session, the UN will vote on the draft resolution condemning the Russian aggression on Ukraine. Bosnia-Herzegovina will vote yes and invite all member states to do so. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, we are gathered here today at one of the darkest times in recent history. My delegation joins the international community in strongly condemning Russia's armed invasion of Ukraine. In this regard, the Republic of Korea co-sponsored the UN Security Council resolution last week, and also the GA resolution scheduled for a vote later on. This war was a choice made by Russia, which would not have taken place if it had listened to the calls of the international community. We condemn any act that seriously undermines the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of any member state. Russia's decision to recognize the independence of certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions undermines the fundamental principles of the UN Charter. Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence must be respected. My delegation takes this opportunity to affirm its solidarity towards Ukraine and its people. We urge Russia to stop its offensive against Ukraine and to immediately withdraw all of its military forces from the territory of Ukraine. We strongly oppose any use of force in seeking a change in status. We also call on Russia to immediately reverse its decision related to the status of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine. My delegation is seriously concerned by the recent announcement by Russia to put its strategic deterrence forces on high alert. We urge Russia to refrain from further escalating the crisis and to seek diplomatic solution. Reports of increasing civilian casualties and mass displacement, as well as the destruction of civilian infrastructure, are of grave concern. The relevant provisions of international humanitarian law and international human rights law should be respected. We welcome the continued efforts of the Secretary General, member states, and regional and international organizations to respond to the humanitarian crises. In this vein, the Republic of Korea will further increase its humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Mr. President, in the early days of this organization, the Republic of Korea was the first country that the United Nations assisted in response to an act of aggression under the Uniting for Peace resolution. The resolution forms the basis of today's emergency special session. The resolution forms the very basis of today's emergency special session. I repeat, my country still exists today because the peoples of the United Nations at the time stood up immediately to the crisis of the innocent lives that had to suffer for no reason of their own. It was a testimony, a clear example of what this organization could do when we are united together with one voice to protect the principles of the UN Charter. This is why my delegation does not see the situation in Ukraine as some distant tragedy. This is why we are expressing our solidarity towards the Ukrainian people. This is why we still try to have hope in this system and the commitment of its member states to uphold the principles of the Charter. And again, this is why we must be resolutely united against this act of aggression. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Trinidad and Tobago.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Trinidad and Tobago welcomes the convening of this emergency special session, though not the circumstances that make it necessary. As a democratic, peace-loving people and an unrelenting advocate of the rule of law, Trinidad and Tobago can neither subscribe to nor ignore any unilateral attempt to violate the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of any state under the threat or use of force. Such acts of aggression and expansionism violate peremptory norms of international law and do violence to the principles and purposes of the Charter of the United Nations, our Charter, to which we, the members of this organization, freely exercise our choice to be bound. For Trinidad and Tobago, therefore, membership of the United Nations constitutes a solemn undertaking, among other things, to promote and support and to devote one's efforts towards the maintenance and strengthening of the rules-based order as the centerpiece of international peace and security. That undertaking cannot legitimately be flouted or discarded at will, as if it were simply a matter of convenience. It is decidedly not a matter of convenience or choice. Rather, it is an obligation that as member states, we all share a duty to respect and to honor unconditionally, and when breaches occur, to defend. The violation of Ukraine's internationally agreed borders and its territorial integrity constitute a real threat to international peace and security, and creates a dangerous precedent inimical to the vital security interests of small states like mine. Trinidad and Tobago will never accept as legitimate or excusable such egregious violation of the Charter and of international law, on which we and other small states, bereft of military arsenals, rely to guarantee our very existence as sovereign independent states. For us, our suit of armor resides in the principles enshrined in the Charter and in the universal and unconditional acceptance of the basic tenets of international law by all members of the international community. Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago therefore condemns the ongoing unilateral military aggression committed by the Russian Federation against the state and people of Ukraine, and calls upon Russia to immediately abandon this action, recall its troops without any conditions, and to return genuinely to the path of dialogue and diplomacy.
The train to
relations within Ukraine, which widened the national divide and increased the suffering of the civilian population. The violent domestic crisis was heightened by another factor, the growing outside pressure of the NATO military bloc towards Ukraine itself.
एंड स्टेट के पास पहुंच जाए तो कर देते, लेकिन वो हुआ नहीं है और उसकी वजह से ही अब बैटल जो है बहुत इंटेंस होगा। खार्किव में भी होगा और कीव में भी होगा। और जो दो पहले मैं आपको बता चुका हूं कि जो एक ईस्टर्न यूक्रेन और कीव के ऊपर ऑक्यूपेशन वो बहुत जरूरी हो गया इनके लिए, ताकि नेक्स्ट टाइम जब वो नेगोशिएटिंग टेबल पे बैठते हैं तो उनका पलड़ा भारी हो। आपका दूसरा प्रश्न एक बार आप बताएंगे प्लीज।
सर मैं ये जानना चाहता हूं कि बगैर बाहरी फोर्सेस की मदद के क्या यूक्रेन ये रेजिस्टेंस इतनी देर तक दे सकता था सर?
जी देखिए, अगर आपको बाहरी फोर्सेस की जो मदद नहीं मिली है वो किस तरह की मिली है? स्टिंगर मिसाइल्स, एंटी टैंक मिसाइल्स, यानी कि ये वो वेपन सिस्टम्स हैं जिनको अर्बन वॉरफेयर के अंदर इस्तेमाल किया जा सकता है और उसी से आपने देखा।
यहीं पर सर एक चीज और, क्या ये हम हाल फिलहाल इतिहास में ये पहली बार देख रहे हैं जहां नागरिकों ने अपने देश की तरफ से इतनी बड़ी तादाद में मोर्चा संभाला है?
बिल्कुल, लेकिन अगर आप रशिया को देखें, जब रशियन के टैंक्स आए और इनके नागरिकों ने उनको रोकने की कोशिश की और निहत्थे थे तो रशिया ने फायर नहीं किया। लेकिन
ब्रिगेडियर दत्ता भी इसमें कुछ जोड़ना चाह रहे हैं सर। दत्ता सर
देखिए, अगर आप 1971 का वॉर देखें जिसमें ईस्ट पाकिस्तान के साथ